A new report from Punchbowl News says that Amazon is looking to avoid the blame for raising prices as a result of President Trump's new tariff.
I think it's a big loss. I think it's, if you look at the deal was not a great deal from the standpoint of they could have made a better deal than that.
We're entering the most dangerous phase of the Trump era, normalization.
U.S. imports fell by 16.3% in April, the steepest monthly drop ever recorded according to Reuters and Axios. And it didn't stop there. By May, shipping analysts confirmed a 22% year-to-date decline in container traffic through major U.S. ports like Los Angeles and Long Beach hubs that once moved the majority of America's imports from Asia. At the heart of the shift is Amazon. To survive Trump's sweeping tariff hikes, including the now infamous 145% tax on Chinese goods, the retail giant has already rerouted more than $13 billion in global supply chain contracts away from the U.S. This isn't speculation. It's happening. Contracts canceled, routes redrawn, factories relocated. And it's not just about Amazon. What we're witnessing is a quiet but seismic retreat from the American trade system, a realignment happening not in headlines but in shipping schedules, investment flows, and empty docks. Mid-2025 may be remembered as the moment America stopped being the center of global trade and started becoming a bypass. Amazon didn't wait for a press conference. It made its move quietly, but it shook the White House. By mid-2025, the company began displaying tariff impact indicators directly on product listings, showing shoppers exactly how much Trump's new tariffs were inflating their costs. The response from Washington was swift. According to multiple reports, President Trump personally called Amazon founder Jeff Bezos, furious that the platform was politicizing trade policy. But behind the scenes, Amazon was already in motion. To protect its bottom line, Amazon quietly redirected over $13 billion worth of supply contracts, shifting orders away from China and high tariff zones. According to reporting from Bloomberg and Carbon 6, the company began restructuring its global logistics footprint to bypass costly duties, rerouting shipments through Mexico, India, and Vietnam. This wasn't just about tariffs, it was about survival. Meanwhile, third-party sellers who account for more than half of Amazon's marketplace scrambled to stock up before the tariffs hit full force. Some built up buffer inventories, temporary stockpiles, to delay passing on the costs. But that buffer is running out. Reuters reports that as of Q2 2025, importers are already facing up to 25% cost increases on electronics and consumer goods, and many smaller suppliers are being priced out entirely. And the stakes couldn't be higher. Amazon controls roughly 40% of U.S. e-commerce, making its supply chain strategy a bellwether for the entire retail sector. When Amazon pivots, warehouses, ports, factories, and even families feel it. And this pivot, quiet, calculated, and massive, is reshaping how goods enter the United States. Trump's 2025 trade offensive didn't come quietly. Dubbed Liberation Day by supporters, the policy slapped a 10% universal tariff on all imports with a punishing 145% duty on goods from China, including electronics, clothing, and household staples. It wasn't just a tax, it was a wall. And for companies that rely on low-cost imports, that wall went up overnight. The consequences were immediate. Prices on consumer electronics and apparel jumped more than 25%, according to industry tracking. Smartphones, laptops, power tools, winter coats, anything with a Chinese supply line became dramatically more expensive. And the bigger picture, U.S. goods imports fell 19.9% in April, the largest single-month drop ever recorded, according to Reuters and Axios. Amazon's pivot, rerouting over $13 billion in contracts and tagging products with tariff costs, wasn't a political stunt. It was a survival tactic. And it wasn't alone. Dozens of major retailers began rethinking their supply chains in real time, not to win a trade war, but to avoid being crushed by it. The fallout from Trump's tariffs isn't just visible on spreadsheets, it's hitting America's ports, warehouses, and workers where it hurts. In 2025, container traffic through the ports of Los Angeles and Long Beach plunged by 22%, according to port authorities and trade reports. These aren't just numbers. These two ports move more than a third of America's inbound goods. And when the containers stop arriving, jobs disappear with them. Dock workers, truck drivers, warehouse crews, and support services all feel the strain. Retail giants are already sounding the alarm. Walmart and Target warn that rising import costs are forcing them to delay shipments and cut inventory, especially on everyday essentials, clothing, electronics, even school supplies. Some products are vanishing from shelves altogether. These aren't luxury items. These are the things families rely on. The bigger picture is just as troubling. Economists estimate that Trump's tariffs are now costing U.S. businesses over $50 billion per year in added expenses, yet reshoring remains stagnant. Factories aren't coming back. Investments aren't flowing into domestic production. Instead, businesses are reconfiguring supply chains around America, not through it. That means less work at U.S. ports, lower tax revenue for local governments, and shrinking paychecks in cities that once powered the global economy. While U.S. ports slow to a crawl, a new trade map is forming, and Amazon is leading the charge. In response to tariffs and rising costs, the company has expanded its logistics operations in Mexico by 35% in 2025, according to supply chain analysts. It's also accelerating investments in India, Vietnam, and Southeast Asia, building out infrastructure in regions that offer lower labor costs, favorable trade agreements, and fewer regulatory hurdles. The shift isn't isolated, it's strategic. China's exports to Southeast Asia surged 20.8% in April, as Chinese suppliers rerouted production and capital toward friendlier markets, easing the blow from U.S. tariffs. That realignment is being reinforced by Western companies, Amazon included, looking to insulate themselves from future trade shocks. The result: U.S. ports are starting to look like detours rather than destinations. As contracts, shipments, and supplier relationships move toward Asia and Latin America, America's traditional role as the central hub of global trade is beginning to fade. This isn't just about cost-cutting. It's about survival in a system that is rapidly outgrowing the structures America once controlled. For all the patriotic slogans and tough-on-China rhetoric, the numbers tell a different story. Since the rollout of Trump's 2025 tariff package, U.S. import volumes have collapsed by 21% to 34% across key sectors, including semiconductors, auto parts, and machinery, according to Reuters. These aren't fringe categories. They're the backbone of U.S. industry and innovation, and they're drying up. In April, the White House pointed to a shrinking trade deficit as a win. But dig deeper, and the picture turns bleak. Exports of tools, industrial parts, and capital goods fell sharply, stripping U.S. manufacturers of their global competitiveness. America may be importing less, but it's also selling less. Meanwhile, markets responded with panic. Stock indexes saw their worst single-week drop since the pandemic in 2020, according to AP and historical market data. The sell-off wasn't just about tariffs, it was about unpredictability. About the fear that American companies, once global leaders, were now boxed into a hostile, fragmented trade landscape. And here's the real kicker: companies didn't bring production home, they just rerouted it. To Mexico, to India, to Vietnam. Instead of reshoring jobs, they outsourced risk. The factories didn't come back, the costs just went up. And what was sold as a revival of American industry is now being revealed as a quiet collapse in strategic planning. China didn't fire back with slogans, it responded with precision. In 2025, as U.S. tariffs took hold, China's export volumes slowed, and its manufacturing PMI hovered dangerously close to contraction at 49.0, according to NY Post. But instead of panicking, Beijing executed a strategic counterstrike, imposing retaliatory tariffs of up to 125% on key American exports like soybeans, semiconductors, and industrial chemicals, while tightening export controls on rare earths, electronics-grade metals, and sensitive machinery items the U.S. still depends on. This wasn't a public spectacle. It was a methodical message. Trade talks resumed in June, but the gap remains massive. 58% tariffs on Chinese goods entering the U.S. compared to just 10% in the other direction, per Reuters. And while Washington focused on short-term leverage, Beijing got to work quietly building long-term resilience. China accelerated trade pacts with Southeast Asia, deepened ties with the EU, and expanded Belt and Road corridors, all moves designed to shrink its dependence on the U.S. market without triggering full-blown economic decoupling. The result is already playing out. Chinese exports to the U.S. have dropped between 21% and 34% this year, depending on the sector. But Beijing isn't retreating, it's adapting. And it's doing so faster than America anticipated. While Washington leans harder into tariffs, hoping to squeeze concessions, China is redrawing the global map and inviting the rest of the world to follow. This is no longer just a trade dispute. It's a realignment of global power. And without a serious domestic industrial plan, America's tariffs risk becoming not tools of negotiation, but symbols of withdrawal. In a world that's already moving on, clinging to outdated leverage may cost the U.S. its seat at the center of the economic table. This wasn't a minor adjustment. Amazon and other global giants didn't just adapt, they rewired the system. The trade routes, logistics hubs, and manufacturing bases that once revolved around the U.S. are now being rebuilt elsewhere. Mexico is rising, India is surging, Vietnam is booming, and China, despite the tariffs, is playing the long game, strengthening its hand while quietly replacing the U.S. in global corridors of commerce. Meanwhile, America's ports are quieter, its supply chains are thinner, its leverage is fading. What was sold as protectionism has turned into isolation. The factories never came back, but the world kept moving. And now the center of gravity in global trade is shifting away from the United States. Here's the cold truth: when the world rewires around you, you don't just fall behind, you get cut out. Subscribe now, because this transformation isn't slowing down. And if you want to understand what's coming next, you'll need more than headlines. You'll need the full map.